Alright guys, so I got a couple different Israel updates that I want to get to here in this video, starting off with this reporting from CNN on a recent Israeli airstrike on a UN shelter that was being used by thousands of Palestinian refugees inside this school complex. So here from CNN with some of the details, they say dozens of people were killed by an overnight Israeli strike on a United Nations-run school in central Gaza in an attack that, surprise, surprise, CNN analysis found was conducted with a US-made weapon. US-made weapon. So the US complicity in these ongoing war crimes, in this ongoing genocide, is getting deeper and deeper as the days progress, and this specific strike reminds me of the recent strike that we covered inside of Rafah, where Israel bombed a refugee camp in a location that they told them was a safe place, supposedly, and they used a GBU-39 Boeing-manufactured, American-manufactured weapon in that strike. Now, it looks like, according to this reporting here from CNN, that is the exact same weapon that was used in this most recent war crime, in this attack on a UN school inside of central Gaza. So they continue with some of the details. They say the school, which is run by the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, also known as UNRWA or the UNRWA, was housing displaced people in the Nusayrat refugee camp at the time of the incident, and at least 45 people were killed in the strike, according to a spokesperson from the Gaza Ministry of Health. And authorities at the nearby Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital said that casualties could rise as the victims were still being brought to a hospital on Thursday morning. Now, keep in mind, guys, when it comes to UNRWA, okay, this is an organization that was set up specifically to try to handle and to try to aid with Palestinian refugees, okay, as a result of the 1948 Nakba, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were expelled from their lands and onward, right? The reason that Israel wants to target UNRWA, the reason that the Israeli Knesset recently advanced a bill to designate UNRWA as a terrorist organization is because they do not want the international community to be able to recognize the existence of Palestinian refugees who are refugees as a result of what? Of the Israeli settler colonial project that requires, as an inherent aspect of it, the displacement of Palestinians from their land. They do not want to recognize the UNRWA organization as a legitimate enterprise, and so they have been launching this attack against UNRWA, not only with this recent Israeli strike, but also with accusations, unproven accusations, of UNRWA employees having some sort of an involvement with the October 7th attack, which the United States, along with many other Western European governments, used those unproven allegations as an opportunity, especially here in the United States, to enshrine in legislation the cutting off of funding to UNRWA, one of the only major human rights organizations that is even capable of facilitating aid to this starving population. Okay, so just as a reminder for people, what exactly these attacks on UNRWA are meant to be. Okay, as we move on with some of the allegations from Israel here, that this UNRWA facility was some sort of a Hamas compound, right? Let's keep in mind the history and the reason that Israel wants to demonize UNRWA as an organization. Now, they continue here. They say the Israeli military confirmed that it carried out the airstrike, so they're not even denying it here, which it said targeted a Hamas compound operating inside of the school. And the Israeli military spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, told journalists that the military was, quote, not aware of any civilian casualties. Not aware of any civilian casualties. He continued, he said, 20 to 30 Hamas and Islamic Jihad militants were targeted in the strike. And those that were targeted were, quote, using the facilities to plan and execute attacks against Israeli forces. Militants who were involved in October 7th attacks on Israel were amongst those killed, Lerner said. Now, the last sentence here in this paragraph I think is probably the most important, which is that CNN cannot independently verify any of these claims. In other words, Israel has not provided any verifiable evidence that Hamas or the PIJ or any other Hamas militant groups were operating inside of this UNRWA school that was housing thousands of refugees. They have no evidence that has been provided. to justify that claim, which is pretty similar to all of the other dozens, if not at this point, hundreds of attacks on UN shelters and refugee camps and mosques and churches and schools, etc., that we have seen over the last couple of months. Every single building that they strike, they say, well, we suspected there was a Hamas militant there. And every single time, it seems like, there is no evidence that is provided to back up that claim. Now they continue. They say a CNN analysis, a video from the scene, and a review by an explosive weapons expert found that US-made munitions were used in the strike on the school. And CNN identified fragments of at least 2 US-made GBU-39 small diameter bombs, or SDBs, in video filmed at the scene by a journalist who worked with CNN. So again, pretty similar to what we saw in Rafah just recently. And also, just as a reminder, a major military operation is what Biden defined as his previous red line inside of Rafah. Israel has far surpassed that at this point, and Joe Biden has revealed once again that he has no red lines for Israel in this genocidal war. They continue. They say Thursday's attack came after the IDF ramped up ground and air assaults in the center of the Gaza Strip on Tuesday amid a deepening humanitarian crisis there. Palestinians in central Gaza have reported that the intensity and frequency of Israeli airstrikes in the last week have felt like the beginning of the war. And just as a reminder, at the beginning of this war, after October 7th, Israel dropped more bombs on Gaza than any other situation in the modern history of warfare. Okay, and we'll get to one of those comparisons here in a second. They continue here, and we'll finish off with this. They say, according to a journalist in the area working with CNN, the school was hit by at least 3 missiles that penetrated the three-story building. The facility was believed to be housing thousands of displaced people who had taken shelter in the school, its yard, and the surrounding area. And the UNRWA commissioner, General Felipe Lazzarini, said that the school was sheltering 6,000 displaced people. And we got a quote here from one of the witnesses on the ground. He says, "We were asleep there, and we suddenly saw rockets falling. I went down holding my child. We were both injured. My relative was martyred in that room." He said that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is killing civilians. He is not killing militants. It's innocent people asleep at the UNRWA facility. What did children and elderly do? What did they do to him? He is looking for Hamas people? Go look for them. Why are you killing us in schools? So this is somebody who's not even sympathetic to Hamas. This is somebody who's saying, okay, you want to go after Hamas militants? Fine. Go after Hamas militants. Why the fuck are you striking elderly and children inside of this UN school? That's what he's saying here. Now, I've seen so many different testimonies from doctors, from nurses, from humanitarian workers on the ground who have been directly inside of some of these locations that Israel says they're attacking because there are Hamas militants there. And every single time I see testimony from the people on the ground, including Americans, including British nurses and doctors who have gone to Gaza to volunteer in this dangerous situation. And every single time they say there was never any Hamas inside of these locations, never any Hamas. But Israel continues to target by the hundreds, if not the thousands, civilian infrastructure locations, housing thousands of civilians who they have displaced, and then later giving the justification of, oh, well, there was Hamas militants there. And they never provide any fucking evidence to back up that claim. They never provide any evidence to back up the claim. Now, to show you what this actually looks like, here we had a journalist on the ground showing some of the aftermath of one of these strikes on the school. Now, you can see sort of here at the beginning stages of this background what this kind of looks like. I mean, this is an UNRWA school location here, and you can see some of the blood on the ground towards the end of this clip, some of the bare thin mattresses that people have been sleeping on in this location. I don't know, guys. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. You guys tell me. Does this look like a major military compound? I mean, does this look like a Hamas, sort of infrastructure here to you guys? Does this look like a place where 30 to 40 Hamas militants or PIJ militants were stationed in this location? I mean, it doesn't look like that to me. It doesn't look like that to me. Now, we continue here. We had an interesting back and forth with Ryan Grimm and State Department ghoul Matthew Miller here on the latest updates on this supposed Israeli ceasefire that seemingly the Israeli government is not in favor of. And let's go ahead and jump into this and then try to make sense of this incomprehensible nonsense here from Matthew Miller.
Thanks, Matt. So the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations has said that Israel is now going to oppose the resolution that the United States is putting forward to push forward the Israeli ceasefire plan. Did that come as a surprise to the United States, and does that undermine the U.S. effort to get Hamas to agree to this deal if Israel is saying that it's going to vote against its own deal at the UN?
So we have been talking with a number of governments, including the government of Israel, about the direction of this resolution and what it ought to look like. Those conversations continue. We do think it is important that the United Nations Security Council speak with one voice on this. We have this rare opportunity where we have a chance to reach an immediate ceasefire that ultimately could lead to an end to this war. And so we want to see the Security Council act. We want to see it act as soon as possible. Now, the way this process works is that you often have to engage in diplomacy with members of the Security Council and sometimes with members of the Security Council to help get a resolution like this over the line. That's what we continue to do.
One quick really brief question.
So it's a little bit strange, right? Why you would have to go out of your way to convince the Israeli government, including the Prime Minister of Israel, as well as the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, to agree to a deal that was supposedly, initially as presented by the Biden administration, an Israeli proposal. Why do you have to convince the Israelis to go forward with an Israeli proposal? I mean, this is why I've been, largely skeptical of this kind of a conversation, is because initially what Joe Biden put forward, he said, this is an Israeli proposal, it's a 3-stage plan, and it was awfully similar to the deal that Hamas agreed to months ago at this point. And then later on, we get more clarification from guys like Matthew Miller, and they start to add in things, right, that were not initially part of Joe Biden's proposal. And they start to add in things like, well, Hamas is going to have to agree to completely dissolve their power inside of Gaza as a part of this ceasefire agreement. I'm sorry, what? Huh? And then you got guys like Matthew Miller who come out and they say things like, well, if Hamas actually cares about the Palestinian people, then they would agree to relinquish power in order to stop the Israeli onslaught that's happening inside of Gaza. And it's like, bro, you've been spending the last 7-8 months at this point talking about how Hamas doesn't give a single solitary shit about Palestinian civilians inside of Gaza. And now you're hinging your ceasefire proposal on the idea that Hamas cares about Palestinian civilians and they're going to be willing to completely relinquish power in order to get a ceasefire proposal. This flies in the face of everything you guys have been saying over the last 7-8 months at this point. And so my conclusion to this, and granted, I hope there is a ceasefire. I desperately hope there is an end to this genocidal slaughter. But based on what I'm seeing from the Joe Biden administration, it seems like this is, once again, basically just a nonsensical proposal that they know that Hamas is not going to agree to, and that they can then use as an excuse to say, look, it's Hamas that's blockading the peace, right? And so we can continue with this genocidal offensive. That's what all of this comes across to me as, right? None of these State Department briefings, guys, I have spent probably hours at this point over the last number of weeks. I watch the entirety of these State Department briefings. Okay, sometimes they're 45 minutes long, sometimes they're 2 hours long. It depends on how long they are. I have spent hours watching these State Department briefings, and I still cannot get anything remotely resembling a coherent idea of what exactly the Joe Biden plan is here. It's still not clear who in the Israeli government is in favor of this ceasefire proposal. How do you think that this ceasefire proposal is going to actually be accepted by Hamas? Right? None of this makes any sense in any way, shape, or form. But we continue here, just with a couple other updates. So, over the last couple of days, we have seen far-right Israeli settlers who have been marching through occupied East Jerusalem and harassing and violently attacking Palestinians. And they have been largely backed up by members of the Benjamin Netanyahu coalition, guys like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who was going out and giving speeches to some of these far-right Israeli settlers on the ground. You can see him there, as well as Bezalel Smotrich here. You can see him dancing with Israeli police behind him and some rabbis in front of him, etc., etc. And as a part of these marches, you end up getting pictures like this. I mean, does this not look like some sort of, I don't know, like a Renaissance painting or something like that. Like if you were to give ChatGPT or like Midjourney the ability to try to render some sort of a an artificial intelligence designed image of Israeli apartheid or Israeli attacks on Palestinians in Jerusalem, like this is what would come from that. I mean, it almost doesn't even look real, right? I mean, you have a bunch of kids here who I would presume are younger than I am. I mean, I'm 24 years old. Most of the kids in this picture look younger than I am. And you have them collectively attacking a Palestinian journalist, who you can see here, clearly identified by his press vest. Later on, you had an Israeli Jewish journalist from the outlet Haaretz who stepped in to try to protect this Palestinian journalist from this fascist Israeli mob of attackers. And he stepped in between the Palestinian journalist and the mob, and then he also got attacked. And these are the kinds of things that are being backed by key members in the Benjamin Netanyahu coalition. The Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich, as well as the Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir. And Ben-Gvir is also trying to escalate tensions by allowing for Israelis to go and pray on the Temple Mount openly, right? So he is intentionally trying to provoke some sort of a reaction right now. So keep this in mind. Keep these kind of stories in mind. If anything ends up exploding into violence inside of the West Bank or inside of Jerusalem, this is the kind of shit that aggravates those tensions. And they're doing this intentionally. You had guys like Itamar Ben-Gvir going out and saying, Jerusalem is ours. Is ours. The Temple Mount is ours. The Israelis, right? So these are the kinds of things that are obviously deliberately intended to bring about some sort of a conflict. Now, at the same time, we also have Israel coming out and basically saying that they're ready to escalate tensions with Hezbollah in Lebanon. So here from Al Jazeera, Netanyahu says Israel is prepared for a very intense operation near Lebanon. I've also seen reporting saying that Israel is preparing to potentially occupy southern Lebanon once again. This is absolutely terrifying, and it should be terrifying not only to people who care about the humanitarian situation on the ground in the region, not only to people in Lebanon, but it should also be terrifying to Israelis, okay? Because, believe it or not, Hezbollah in Lebanon is not Hamas. Now, the IDF has been getting smoked by Hamas in countless different videos that I've seen of Hamas militants engaging in sort of like guerrilla warfare tactics against the IDF inside of Gaza. But if the IDF tries to go and occupy southern Lebanon, the amount of soldiers from the Israeli military who will be smoked by Hezbollah will be incalculable relative to what has happened over the last 8 months inside of Gaza. Hezbollah is not Hamas, and I cannot emphasize that enough. Hezbollah has the military capacity to inflict an absolutely ungodly amount of damage to Israel. You've already had to have Israeli citizens in the northern portion of Israel evacuate because of some of the attacks that Hezbollah has been launching. Now, I'm not saying this is like a cheerleader of Hezbollah or a fan of Hezbollah. I'm just saying from a pure military standpoint, Hezbollah is not the same as Hamas. And if Israel wants to open, or if Netanyahu, to protect his own ass, to protect his own political career, wants to open another front of this war, that's going to be an absolute unmitigated disaster for Israel. This is not something you can just go clean sweep through, okay? So this is something that we have to keep our eyes on, because this is going to be a major development. Now, in terms of Lebanon, we also have this update here from Human Rights Watch, just posted this recently a couple of days ago. Israel's use of white phosphorus in southern Lebanon is putting civilians at risk and contributing to displacement. Human Rights Watch verified the use of white phosphorus munitions by Israeli forces in at least 17 municipalities in South Lebanon since October of 2023. They're using white phosphorus, which is banned under international law unless it's an extremely unique military purpose. Israel not using those extremely unique situations. But they have been repeatedly, in at least 17 municipalities, been using white phosphorus on civilian populations inside of southern Lebanon. So just another war crime to add to the list of dozens of other ones that we have been documenting. Now, a couple other bits of information here from Al Jazeera. 9 out of 10 children in Gaza lack food for growth, according to UNICEF. So these are the kind of statistics where it's like, I don't really even know what more I can say about this. I don't even know what I could possibly add to this, because it's not enough somehow that we've had 15,000 children that have been supposedly killed inside of Gaza over the last, 7-8 months at this point. It's not enough that we've had countless other thousands of Palestinian children who have been maimed, who have lost limbs, who have lost family members, who have engaged in trauma that none of us could possibly imagine. But then you add on top of it stuff like this. 9 in 10 children lack food for growth. What are the long-term implications of statistics like this? Right? Because it's bad enough that there are people who are literally starving to death at this point. But what about the people who have lost limbs? What about the people who have lost family members? What about the people who are the children who are starving? How is this going to impact them long term, right? Think about the countless tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of children inside of Gaza, right? Because half the population of Gaza is children. Think about the impact this is going to have on their physical, on their psychological development moving forward. I mean, it is just a fucking nightmare. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. 9 out of 10 children in Gaza lack food for growth. 9 out of 10. And I'm supposed to what? I'm supposed to believe this is a targeted war against Hamas? Oops. We had to starve the whole fucking population of Gaza to go after Hamas. Oops, we had no other choice. The fuck out of here, man. I mean, we move on with some more images here. This is what it looks like in Khan Yunis at this point. And again, just to back up the same thing I was just saying, when you look at an image like this, how are you possibly supposed to come away with the conclusion that this is a targeted operation? The thousands of hospitals, schools, UN shelters, refugee camps, everything in between that Israel has obliterated, flattened to the ground. We have estimates saying that it'll take decades, in a best case scenario, to rebuild Gaza. I'm supposed to look at the imagery like this and believe that this is a targeted operation against Hamas? What fucking targeted operation is this? Look at this kind of destruction, right? Imagine if this was your neighborhood. Imagine if this was your city that looked like this. Would you, going through this, believe that this was a targeted operation against the bad guys? Probably not. Probably not, right? Now we'll finish off with this to show some scale of the destruction. So here is a side-by-side comparison of what's happened in Gaza since October 7th versus what happened during World War II to some of the most bombed-out places in modern history. So we're comparing London, Hamburg, and Dresden to the Gaza Strip. Israel has bombed more than 70,000 tons of bombs on the Gaza Strip since October, far surpassing the combined total for Dresden, Hamburg, and London during World War II. These are some of the most bombed out places in modern history. Israel has surpassed that on one of the most densely populated places where half the population is children on the face of the planet. 70,000 tons of bombs, when in Dresden during World War II, they dropped less than 4,000. What are you supposed to do with this kind of information? Genuinely. I mean, it's a real question at this point. I don't know how much more commentary I can add to statistics like this. I genuinely don't. You look at comparisons like this, and it's like, this is not, as some people claim, oh, this is just a tragic part of war. Civilians die, it's unfortunate, Hamas shouldn't have started. No, this is not normal. This is not normal. This is totally unprecedented. It's not comparable to any other modern example of warfare throughout history. It's not comparable in terms of the amount of journalists who have been killed, the amount of aid workers who have been killed, the amount of fucking children who have been killed, the amount of civilian infrastructure that has been destroyed. None of this is normal. None of this is just a oopsie daisy, this is a part of war, sorry about that kind of situation. It's not that kind of a situation, right? So, listen guys, there's your update for today. Increasingly as time goes on, I'm getting more and more fed up with this. I don't know if you guys could tell based on my commentary in this video, but it's getting infinitely more frustrating as time goes on, covering just the most brazen and disgusting fucking war crimes that I've ever seen in my entire life, repeatedly, over and over and over again, with absolutely nothing done to address it by my government that simultaneously wants me to believe that in this upcoming election it's about protecting freedom and democracy and human rights. This is what we believe on. This is what we believe in the international stage. We want to promote democracy and human rights and freedom, etc., etc. I'm supposed to believe that. At the same time that you're supporting this apartheid regime that is engaging, and objectively at this point, what is an obvious genocide, what is probably the most obvious genocide in the history of modern warfare at this point.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying